Well, hello, Mary. How are you?
Good, Kelly.
Welcome to the podcast today, episode 3.
I know it's exciting.
It
The
is
excitement is
exciting.
building.
Um,
I have a question. Any feedback from any of the listeners that stand out in your mind from episode 2?
no, I didn't really have so much this time. What about
Okay.
you?
No? Okay. Well, that's not true. I've had at least 2 people come forward to say how intrigued they are, that they're very encouraged by the information that we're presenting and are already becoming faithful listeners. So,
Okay, sweet. I like that.
yeah.
Cool. Okay, well, yeah, let's just get into the topics today. I know we talked a little bit about before
Was
we start the topic of anger,
Yes.
because it's often used and abused or justified, used to justify actions, and it's a
Right.
natural human emotion. So I don't know if you want to welcome the channel or you want to talk
Yes.
first. a little
But I
more?
also want to make sure that in our time together that we discuss that definition, that anger was never used, but it was more the reference to fervor.
Yeah, no,
That
we'll get
was
into that for sure.
Fascinating.
Definitely going to talk about
Okay.
the Bible,
All right, good. All right, yeah.
because that's what everyone uses to justify.
Yeah, no, this was new to me, and
Okay. No, I've done
and
a
I'll
deep
just
dive on it.
it's beautiful. I'll just share, and I don't know that I have, and then I'll bring the channel in. I was raised in a traditional Christian upbringing, and we were, it wasn't pushed down our throats, as the saying goes, but I certainly memorized a lot of Bible verses and spent a lot of time studying the Bible through Sunday school and other activities. So to come across that information we're bringing in today is just fascinating to me, So there's always plenty to learn.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Well, I'll bring the channel to the forefront. One moment. Greetings, dear one. It is always our divine pleasure to sit in company with you and then to have this very beautiful opportunity to offer our insights in response to your very thoughtful questions. And it's very revealing, if we may just say something to you on a personal note, but not too personal. The inner workings of some of your mind, some aspects. It's really fascinating to see even how you create the topics, how you feel inclined to go into the depth of the different topics. So we're honored.
Good.
Yes, it's fascinating. So
It's a blessing and a curse having this mind sometimes.
it would certainly prove to be challenging because it's quite unique the way you see the world. And yet, truthfully, dear, it's important that and we commend you for your willingness to share, because others that don't think the way you do, that don't have a mind that's synced up the way yours is, are exposed to greater learning and greater insights for having listened to how you process, how you quite literally view the world. So we thank you for
Thank you.
your worthy contributions to all of this.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
Yes.
So let's get right into anger. One of my favorite books, religious texts, the Bhagavad Gita. I talk a lot about it to my yoga students. It specifically says that anger is one of the 3 gateways to hell, along with greed and lust. And it basically condemns anger in all forms. But what I hear a lot of times are Christians using the term righteous anger to justify anger when maybe you see wrongdoing or, that type of anger where you're helping someone else and there's injustice. There we go. That's what we're
Right.
looking for. Righteous anger. And the most oft-cited biblical story I hear to justify it is when Jesus was out in front of the temples with the money changers and flipped the tables, and supposedly he was angry.
Right.
And what I wanted to point out before I get into the questions, some of what we were talking about a little bit about where my mind goes with this, is that the word anger is actually never used in the Bible. The Greek word zelos is used, which is where the root for the word zeal comes from in English, or fervor. Jesus is never described as angry, literally, in the Greek. Now, sometimes it's translated that way.
Correct.
But in all 4 Gospels, I believe this story is mentioned. I know at least in Mark and Matthew, and the word is zelos. It's not anger.
Fascinating.
It's not the Greek
Yes.
anger,
Mhm.
which there is a word for. I don't have that written down, but there is another word that would work if that's the word that was meant. And then we look at the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus specifically talked about anger and said, anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment and specifically condemned anger. So I guess I would raise the proposition first that maybe there wasn't righteous anger
Right.
in the Bible. And maybe Jesus really was teaching us that anger in all its forms is bad. Now, I know it's a natural human emotion and we can get into that. It's not about trying to push it away. But
Right.
first, let me just ask, is righteous anger a justifiable form of anger?
We would say straight out, dear, no, right? We go to the quote, an eye for an eye, right?
Mhm.
Someone can feel justified in hurting someone that they perceive as doing wrongdoing. And there are individuals and even organizations that do wrongdoing. But again, an eye for an eye, then both are blind.
Yes.
So the very understanding that while these emotions can run very deep and be very passionate, a lot of zeal, a lot of energy around the emotions, and one might feel justified in attacking back, but ultimately no one is served and the lessons are not learned when it becomes more a quarrel or a fight rather than a solution.
Yes, that makes sense. And I know anger, if we get into semantics, the word can mean different things to different people. So,
Yes.
we're speaking of that sort of justified sense of wrath and rage that people can feel. And again, it's a natural human emotion. So I guess I would just posit the question, is anger ever okay?
Well, we're going to go back to something you said just moments ago, that it's a natural human emotion. We're not quarreling with you over that, but we also think it gets maybe trumpeted out there a bit too much. Like,
Yeah.
well, you're going to be super angry, you're going to be sad, you're going to feel abandoned, we do believe there's a wide range of emotions, and we have probably already spoken about that. And so anger, bitterness, resentment, there's any number of ways to describe that range of emotions. While it might rush through the body as an experience, as a sensation, our belief is the more someone dwells on that,
Yes.
the more it is ignited. And so all the more reason to go, wow, that's really upsetting to me. That really makes me feel angry. What is it I can do about it? And truthfully, let's just talk on an individually. It's like, is this a time for me to take action? Maybe I can write a letter
Yeah.
rather than attack. So the sooner, again, we speak more to the individual and ultimately groups of individuals, right? Where can we find solution in this? It's not about denying, and sometimes when someone is moved to anger, there is zeal in that. There is impetus to act.
Yeah.
So, and that can be channeled toward good rather than channeled towards something destructive that just creates more disharmony.
So maybe I'll raise a proposition. Of course, anger may still arise and we can sit with it, release it, channel it for good, but to hold it, would you say that that's
It
sort of...
festers.
Yeah.
If someone, just to bring it down to the most, mundane, if someone sees a little mildew in the corner of the bathtub and they're like, yeah, I'm not going to. Well, a month later, 2 months later, it's not as small, right? It starts to grow. So addressing an issue early on, addressing an emotion that really registers as a lower vibration emotion, it's not to be judged in a negative way, like, oh, I shouldn't be angry.
Yeah.
I just need to be peaceful. It's shame on me. And then there's shame compounding the anger. It is a call to action, like, wow, that's upsetting. What can I do about it? First, let me still myself. Let me get into a more centered place. Let me balance out, whether that's a walk in the woods, waiting a week to take action if it's a possibility, just breathing out. There's any number of things, but quieting the self first so that one does not act irrationally and then have regret for having done so.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is that parable that I've heard too? It's like anger is like a hot coal that one holds with the intention of throwing at someone else.
Have not heard it, but it makes good sense, right?
The one that gets burned.
This is exactly right. It's just conversely, as we have spoken before, when someone is holding good thoughts for someone else, they are benefiting from those good thoughts, right? They are the one on the receiving end. So if someone is like, I don't know why that guy was such a big fat jerk, oh my God, blah, 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 they're going on, they're the one housing the same energy as that quote person that they are judging.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not, it can be a slippery slope sometimes because people think, oh, then you're just denying it. Like, oh, you're not experiencing all of what humanity has to offer. We think it's imperative to experience the full range of emotions from a place of honesty and integrity. And some are harder than others. Everyone wants to stay in the joy and the bliss and the happy and the content. But when the harder, more challenging emotions show up, our sense is to absolutely drop into them honestly. And what does that trigger in me? Why is that upsetting to me, right? And what can I do that's positive to bring about, as we said, a solution?
And what if there's nothing that can be done in the moment? Then that might be the sort of suggestion from the universe that to let it go in that moment. I mean,
it's fair to say that, but most people find it very hard to let go. Like, oh, well, it's not my problem. Like, oh, I'm not going to worry about it, or, oh, it really triggers a lot of anger in me, but I'm going to let that go. That can set up more conflict, right?
Yeah.
So again, being still in it and say, when I do feel moved to do something, I will act then. But again, a return to peace, then at least there's not more festering, there's not more increasing. And maybe let's just say there's nothing that they can do, right? An individual. So there's still always positive thinking. There's still always prayer. There's still always holding hope. Even if someone doesn't want to pray that there be a positive solution, they can hold hope for a positive outcome. And then they can return to hope rather than trying to let go of something that's agitating them.
Kind of reminds me of leaving space for the possibility of other outcomes, because sometimes it's hard to do that. But if you can at least see that there's a glimmer of space, then
absolutely
you're not foreclosing possibilities. Because I feel like we do that with our minds in a way. When we decide what the outcome is, we just kind of close it, box it in.
And dear, we won't repeat this after this moment in time, but there's a perfect example of how your mind works that we would argue with you to say is not a curse. That's the way to check that off in the blessing box side, right? Because honestly, that's a brilliant way to say. Truthfully, it's brilliant. Like if someone says, "I just don't know what to do. I'm just so angry," it just makes it. But there must be a possibility, and just holding that glimmer of, even if I don't see it right now, even if it's not mine to do, maybe someone else comes along with a solution. So holding that space where you've stated it so beautifully, then it really does open up possibility. The very intention of holding space can open up space.
Yes, I found that very useful in my own life when things seem bleak, or I start to find myself kind of just pigeonholing reality, which actually we're going to get into as well a little bit later. But I do think we can kind of, in a way, we create our own realities with our minds. So we decide, when we pre-decide outcomes without any space for other possibilities, we sort of put blinders up.
Yes.
And I kind of motion them with my hands, like you create this box around your vision almost, where you can see what you've space for. So if you can't even see the possibility of change, it's hard, if it's in your face, to even visualize it.
Yes.
Interesting. So I mean, just a couple other things on anger. I did have another quote, because we brought in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a yogic text, a Hindu text for those that don't know, and we talked about the Bible. But also Buddha there's a quote of him where he said, it was the parable of the saw, and I can't remember exactly how the parable went, but I know that he said, "If you are angry, you're not my student." So again, we see a lot of these religious masters kind of cautioning against anger, these ancient texts. And it reminds me too of, as an attorney, I'm an attorney, we say that we're zealous advocates for our clients, but we should avoid that tendency to get personally involved with anger. Anger feels so much more personal than zeal.
Yes. Someone can be impassioned about something.
Yeah.
and have zeal about something, but anger seems to be that kind of you almost feel like there's going to be retaliation, there's going to be a negative action because of those emotions,
and it makes it harder to control your actions. Sometimes in anger we do things we wouldn't do if we weren't angry. And it does seem that we kind of, as a society, are more prone to rest in anger, especially when it comes to politics. Like,
can we pause just for a moment?
Yes, absolutely.
Because we wanted to just address that quote from Buddha.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Because it's interesting. This is the second time now that we have been subject to that quote. And our sense is having some knowledge of the life and the teachings of Buddha, that almost feels harsh. And we wonder if there's been some kind of, and perhaps unintentional, misquote in translating it. Because it feels like you're not going to be one of my students if you have anger. It feels that way.
Yeah.
And chances are his message was
wasn't about
softer to say, my teachings are thus, and if you adhere to believing anger is justifiable, then we're not in alignment. You're not really aligning with my teachings, as opposed to I'm not going to let you be my student. That's the feeling we have and we're not faulting you. We're just saying probably somewhere along the translation line, there seems to be some harshness in there that doesn't really speak to the way we perceive Buddha's life.
And it was part of a parable, which I had written down. I should probably look it up. We can pause and I can look it up, but it's the parable of the saw. And so it was part of a story that he told. It wasn't the whole story.
Right.
And I don't think it was, if you ever have anger, you're not my student. It wasn't in that context. Okay. But why don't we look it up? I can look it up real quick.
Perfect.
Okay. So I found using the internet, the Buddhist parable. Let's see. It states that even if bandits were to savagely saw you limb from limb, you must not harbor ill will toward them. Instead, you should respond with boundless, radiating, loving kindness. So that was the core teaching. It says, this is the AI, of course, summary, but it says the parable challenges followers to completely abandon anger and retaliation, no matter how extreme the provocation. So it was an example of, kind of an extreme example. You're being sawed in half. Of course, you're going to feel anger. It may arise, or not of course, but typically anger would arise toward the perpetrator. It really evokes to me that sense of when Jesus even said, forgive them, they know not what they do. The Roman soldiers that are
crucifying.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a similar type of story there, which is interesting.
Yes.
So it wasn't like he just said straight out, if you ever have anger, you're not my student. He was trying to teach that, even in this extreme circumstance, you're literally being sawed in half.
Right.
Jesus is very similar, being crucified, being tortured, that to harbor that ill will toward the perpetrators is not right.
Right. And just to say, when you think about it, of course, if someone is attacking you or doing harm to you as an individual, human nature would be, I'm going to attack back. But as Buddha has said there, to radiate such unthinkable, unimaginable love and compassion. So if someone is being attacked and they're radiating the good, then chances are that could very well disarm the individual harming. Or if it doesn't, let's say they're just so caught up in justifiable anger, or they think they're doing the right thing, so they go ahead and kill the individual or whatever, it'll still stay with them that, wow, they didn't fight me back.
Yeah.
So it can leave a lasting impression, even if it doesn't stop the action. Most people will think over things again and again, like, wow, and then they can start to have self-reflection and go, maybe I didn't do the right thing. But if there's an attack back, then they're going to feel vindicated.
Justified.
Yeah.
And this is what I feel like we see so often in politics, especially here in America, with how kind of split into,
fractions.
Yeah, like how to say it. But, there's basically kind of two polar opposites.
Right.
And so there's just justified anger people feel toward the other side and toward actions that the other side has done. And, sometimes we can objectively say that an action was bad or needs to be punished in some way. But that doesn't mean you have to hold that anger toward the actor. But how do we navigate that? Like, because obviously there are bad actions. And this kind of ties into what we were talking about in the first episode with the nature of good and evil, whether people are inherently good or inherently evil. But let's say in politics, just to give an example, that someone on the other side does something and you feel very angry about it. What practically can you do with that anger when you feel incensed by, something that a political rival?
Well, we would say the first thing to do is not react right away, right?
Yeah.
It's to quiet the spirit as quickly as possible. Again, whatever it takes to sort of diffuse that anger, even if it's temporary. And from that more rational, relaxed place, even if it takes an hour or a day or a week, then say, what is it that I can do? It's like, and so often, again, and by not overreacting or acting irrationally quickly, then good, clear thinking can come about. And in that instance, like we're saying, well, maybe that person can rally 2 or 3 more people that are like-minded and go have a discussion or take action collectively against one person on the other side that's doing these things. So, but again, acting too quickly and acting from this erratic place can cause more harm than good.
So basically, overall, we would say that the Bhagavad Gita's sort of statement against anger, you would agree that is, maybe not accurate all the time, because sometimes anger is going to arise. It's not a blanket prohibition against even feeling anger, but that generally, anger would be one of the gateways to hell, as the Bhagavad Gita says.
Well, that creates a whole other dialogue about what is hell, right? But even if it's just a hellish state within
is what,
right? Let's just say a hellish state within. So, and it's interesting. We didn't really touch on this extensively, but if 2 people can witness the same thing. One person can see someone throwing trash out the window or walking along and just throwing trash. And another person can see the same action, seeing someone throw trash. Well, if one person has been raised like, who cares? It's just a planet, it's just a little litter. Someone else will pick it up. They keep walking on and they think nothing of it. And the other person is moved to anger, like, how can they ruin our planet? How can they throw trash? So the individual can say, wow, that really triggers something in me. That really is upsetting to me. So maybe that's my work. Maybe that's my calling, to inform people, to put signs up, or to have people gather to collect trash. So maybe it's a calling for me to take action while someone else doesn't move them one way or the other. So sometimes when someone is really upset about something, it's really their own soul saying, what are you here to do to make sure these things don't continue? So if someone attacks back, they might be missing the higher calling to do something on a grander scale.
Like maybe those types of triggers are signs or hints.
Yes.
That's where your fervor, your calling is.
Yes,
so follow
exactly
that.
Right. As opposed to, that guy, that gal.
And it does sort of tie into what we had said in prior episodes when we were looking at the nature of good and evil, that maybe it would be better not to necessarily blame the actor. I mean, we can always go into the psychology of what would cause someone, let's say with your example, to throw trash out of a window. It might have to do with their own cultural upbringing and not necessarily intention. And even if there is intention, you have to look at what causes someone to have those intentions.
Right.
So that might be a hint as to why harboring anger toward especially an individual is not the right way to do it.
It can absolutely cloud the mind. And always we come back to looking through the eyes of compassion. And like you said, culturally, maybe that person, there was nothing seen inappropriate about just throwing a little trash.
Yeah.
Right? So culturally, maybe that's just the norm where that person might have grown up. And so they're oblivious to it, and someone can be holding all this anger and they're like, I don't even know why you're upset, It
seems so silly to feel that anger towards someone who's not intentionally doing anything.
Right. And it's very easy to project, like, that guy's a big jerk because he must have known. And well, maybe that guy didn't even realize he did it. Maybe it fell out of his pocket, or maybe his culture. So coming back to a place of centeredness and stillness and peacefulness as quickly as possible to say, is there something I need to do? But either way, let me remove as much judgment as possible. If someone is just egregiously doing an awful thing, then maybe there needs to be something personally addressed there. But again, attacking most likely is not going to get the outcome that's going to be the most beneficial.
Yeah, it seems like anger in response to anger just creates more anger.
Correct.
Whereas if, you can zealously advocate from a place of compassion, that you're less likely to keep that anger stirred up.
Right.
It's just going to keep
And that
circulating.
person, let's say they're ill-informed and like, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem. How many people break a rule and they're like, oh, I didn't know that was a rule, and so being informed, being treated respectfully, even if it feels they've done something disrespectful, will probably create a positive change much sooner than attacking and so on and so forth.
Yeah, because if someone feels personally attacked, they're less inclined to listen to what you have to say.
Absolutely. They're going to throw 2 pieces of litter out.
Just because they don't like the energy behind where you're coming from. Whereas if, you're doing it in a way that's not personal and just informative, and
Right.
then that they're not at fault, then it just might be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it could be innocent.
Change.
A lot of times it's not. We're not saying, oh, they're
absolutely.
innocent. They don't know what they're doing. A lot of people absolutely know what they're doing and they don't care, So there might be action required. But so often when it comes from a place of strength and truth and clarity and conviction and not anger, retaliation, then rightful action, good can come about, we've almost always believed, much sooner than the other way.
Yeah, it does seem that way, doesn't it? Well, let's say, is there anything else that you'd like to say about the anger topic before we switch gears a little?
No, we're good. Because I don't want to be angry if you switch topics.
But I kind of want to go to something I had a little farther down, which we touched on during the anger, which is this idea of leaving space for possibilities. Because we went into that a little bit with anger. And I have it under the heading of manifesting, just this idea about how we sort of play into creating our own reality. We can call it manifesting. We could also just debate how much control we really have over reality. It might be a lot less than we think. But it does seem like when we don't leave space for possibilities, when we've decided what reality is, that we're sort of reducing reality to a particle or a wave. Are you familiar with that sort of analogy?
No, but we're following you.
So there's, I think it's like the Schrödinger's cat analogy. And there's this idea that at a subatomic level, that particles are neither, or that quantum particles are neither a particle nor a wave. They're not energy necessarily or a solid thing. Like, so if you were to look at our atoms under a microscope, that they can either be a movement of energy or they can be a solid particle, but they're neither and both at the same time until we observe them. That's the Schrödinger's cat analogy. And I'm not doing the best job of describing it, but it's this idea that there's a cat in a box. And if the atom is a particle, the cat dies. And if it's a wave, the cat lives, something like that. And that your act of observing it decides whether the cat lives or dies.
Wow.
And there's more to it, but it's a famous analogy of whether reality's been reduced to a particle or a wave. It's called Schrödinger's cat. And the idea is that the act of observing actually changes reality. And that's provable with quantum physics.
Right.
So even though I'm doing a sort of poor job of explaining it.
You've done well.
They're kind of familiar with this. So I have this kind of idea that when we decide, how reality can be, when we don't leave space for other possibilities, that we're literally kind of reducing reality at that moment to a particle or a wave. So when you're around people that constantly do that I get a little triggered.
Sure.
People that just kind of walk around and judge constantly.
Right.
And I think that can be problematic because you don't leave space for possibilities. But I'm wondering, I guess the question is, how do we leave space for possibilities? Well, first of all, let's just take a step back. Would you agree kind of with that analysis of reality? Does that make sense that by judging it, we kind of decide what it is?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll give you an example of someone just recently. It's just interesting. there were two individuals sharing a meal together in someone's home, and it got quiet in between conversations. So one of the individuals said, "Oh, let's play some music." Not knowing the other very well, was not sure what kind of music they might like, right? And there was some light conversation, so thinking, some background music. And the other individual said, "Oh, I don't like music. It's loud." And the thought that they had ruled out all music was unfathomable to the other person. Like, all music, like, they didn't bother to respond. Like, what was that? So this is someone that has reduced their world to have no music. And it's interesting, of all things to say, music is quite often referred to as the universal language, right? So music is one of the things that actually brings so many people together. So if someone says, "Well, I don't really like jazz, but hey, we're going to a jazz club," and they're like, "Wow, that was really enjoyable. I liked it." So using music just as an analogy, there's such a vast amount of music, right? Heavy music, light music, background music, instrumental.
Yeah.
You're a musician. So finding joy, we don't want to really go down that path, but accepting that there's a variety of things and a variety of possibilities, even the violin. Some call it the violin, some call it the fiddle. It depends how you play it, right?
Yes.
So staying open to possibilities. If someone has only learned classical, they're like, "Oh, I only play classical." And then they go hear some really good fiddle music. They're like, "Well, wait a minute, I could do that," So the life, because it's ever evolving, it's such a disservice to anyone to think they know so much that they will rule out other possibilities, right? If life is changing and expanding and someone goes, "Oh no, I don't trust that, I don't like that." And again, so often it comes back to some limited experience, limited exposure, a trauma maybe early on. But to say, "I don't like" or "I won't," based on past experiences or even just perceptions, it's such a disservice to the individual. They may end up not liking it and say, "No, I really prefer classical, but I'm glad I explored it." So always staying open when it feels in alignment with the good. We're not saying stay open to things that feel inappropriate in any way, right? But to stay open allows for curiosity, it allows for wonder, it allows for the extension of expansion. And in all of that, there's such richness of life to be experienced.
So true. And it's funny because that is one of the things that actually drives me nuts about people. But because it does, then I'm sort of judging them. So now I'm not leaving space for possibilities by doing that in a way. But
yes, and so we would encourage you to use language that feels less hard. If you say, and we're not judging you, judging others. But if you're like, "Oh, that just drives me nuts," right?
Yeah.
So you're going into that place of like, right? Let's say something triggers you and someone says, "Oh, I don't like that," or whatever. One of those. And you're like, and you go right into that place. Then you don't like what they don't like.
Doing the same thing.
Right? So we would say to find language that still addresses your feelings, doesn't deny it or suppress it, but doesn't take it to that lower space. So something that we would say sounds a bit neutral, but like, "Well, isn't that something?" So it is something. It's something you actually don't like, and it's something you don't respect. But instead of going like, "Oh, I hate when people are like that," right? You could say, "Well, isn't that something?" So it feels more neutral, and it really does open up more possibility to something actually being better. Do you understand?
I mean, it kind of makes me think of what you were saying earlier, which is that, wait, what was it? I lost it. Well, you're saying, "Isn't that something?" Like, oh, I know what it was. When you had said earlier that, like, if something kind of triggers you, maybe that's your life's work.
Absolutely.
So the fact that I get a little triggered by other people's closed-mindedness, and it kind of triggers my closed-mindedness toward them in a way. And maybe that's partly because I'm supposed to philosophize about these things.
These are teachings of yours, right?
Yeah.
But as an so yes, there might be something that you're going to share with others to say, boy, I know how you feel because I'm the same way.
Yeah.
If somebody's on the outside going, I don't know why you get so spun up about things like that, then they're not the person to teach about it because they don't get it. It's not one of their challenges. But really, if someone's just going about their everyday life and they see something that's, it's like, how can people do that? Just say, well, isn't that something? Some kind of statement that doesn't go as dark, doesn't go as judgy, doesn't go as heavy. Then again, it's really an energetic form of opening up to other possibilities.
It sounds like curiosity instead of judgment. It's like,
yes.
well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That happened.
How about that?
Yeah.
How about that? And there can still be some like, how about that? But it's not as bad as like, they're making me really upset.
Well, it is a curiosity. And I feel like a lot of times judgment can be trumped with curiosity.
Yes.
Using curiosity instead of
yes.
kind of going, why is it this way? Why do I feel this way? And why would they say that? And using curiosity instead of judgment.
Yes.
But even in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a lot of talk about likes and dislikes. There's a lot of yoga instruction on that generally, that as humans, when we kind of get pigeonholed into I like this and I don't like that, it's sort of like a way of controlling reality, I think, for a lot of us.
Or the perception of controlling reality.
Yeah. That's what can we really
creating
control.
Safety.
Yes. Safety. And it's like people walk around with a list of their likes and dislikes and they're closed off to other possibilities often. And it does trigger me a little.
If they're willing, and so often it comes down to willingness to explore slightly outside their comfort zone, more times than not, most people are like, well, that wasn't so bad. Or, oh, I kind of like that, So, and if someone feels judged, they're going to be less inclined, like, well, that's just how I am.
Yeah.
But if the other person is less judgy, right, is more understanding or more willing to look at it from a place of curiosity, wow, I didn't realize that was upsetting to you. I don't really understand that. But, and if they feel safe to explore it, they'll probably feel safe to expand and maybe make some shifts.
Yeah. I mean, people that feel judged are going to be a lot less likely to change than they feel not judged. So true. So this was kind of ties into leaving space for possibilities. It's recognizing this idea that we do, as humans, tend to judge reality, but noticing when we do it and maybe leaving some space for other possibilities so that we don't get pigeonholed. Because correct me if I'm wrong, or would you agree that it can stifle the creative process when we're...
Absolutely. It's like turning the light out and wondering why you can't see the paint. Absolutely. Curiosity, staying open to possibilities, it's part of the illumination that comes with creativity.
Yeah.
So when someone, has a writer's block, or I just don't know what to do, or I'm bored, I'm stuck, the best thing someone can do is go observe, go expand, go explore, right? And stay open to, we get excited. Stay open to what the day can offer, like what's out there that I don't know that has wonder in it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you open up more possibilities for your life. And I like that. I had also, sometimes I feel like this might tie into needing space and time before reducing decisions to words, because sometimes just reducing something to words kind of makes it a certain reality.
Yes.
That makes sense.
It's so beautifully said, especially in a culture like this culture in America. People are like, well, explain that to me. What do you mean by that? Tell me what you're thinking. There's a lot of prompts, if you will, that are asking someone to reduce to words, like, why are you upset? What's going on with you? And maybe the person is just at the edge of being upset, and they haven't even pinpointed what's upsetting them, or what the emotion is. It might be more than one emotion. And so if someone, even if they're well-intended, is like, we need to talk. You're upset. We need to talk. Maybe that person needs to sit, explore their own emotions, again, come back to a more centered place. And from that place, maybe they can say, thank you for being patient with me. I just needed some time to feel into it or process, and now I'm ready to reduce it to language.
Yes.
Because often it's not perceived as reducing to, but language in and of itself is a pigeonhole.
It's limited.
Right? It's very limiting. And it's important for people, to the best of their ability, to remember that feelings and the very essence of life is far greater than that which can be explained in words. So words are probably best left for toward the end rather than leading into with, right? Because that there can be misunderstandings. Like, well, this is what you said.
Yes.
Well, this isn't what I meant. It's not what I'm feeling. Well, why did you say it? Because I couldn't put it in words yet, right?
Yeah.
Got it to sit. Mm-hmm.
I find that sometimes, though, that because I try to do that before I can reduce things to words, and also I have a hard time in the past, and partly just because of how my brain works, using the right words to explain feelings, because feelings feel so vast,
right?
And words feel so
they are right.
So sometimes I have a hard time reducing feelings to words. But I think that sometimes what happens to me is I might come off as indecisive or wishy-washy for wanting sort of that time to sit with things. So what advice could you give to someone like me?
That's just great. We're going to ask you to repeat that question in just a moment, because this image keeps tapping in. How often have people gone to the Grand Canyon, for example, seen a great wonder of the world, or seen the pyramids or something, and they come back going, the pictures don't quite tell the story, right? They're like, I was standing right there, and you're like, wow, okay, that's nice. And then you see these wonders, whether it's the ocean or the mountains, so it's the analogy of trying to capture in a photograph the vastness and the energy and the essence, right? So words are very similar. It's like trying to, summarize in this huge experience, this vast array of emotions. Like, well, tell me how you feel, right? Like, how do I do that? So would you be so kind as just to present that question again? Like, you were saying something like people might think you're being aloof or
a wishy-washy or indecisive by wanting to avoid reducing things to words immediately.
So it's so truthfully, dear, part of and we're glad you're kind of referencing the way your mind works, because there are many individuals that feel so alone in the way they process things. And fortunately, there's new research coming out, new studies coming out, new material coming out to help educate people. Like, not everybody's mind works like this, right? So, neurodivergent, all the great terms coming out now. But so here's the thing, dear. It is, if you can recognize that person's over there going, she doesn't even know, they're going into judgment, right? Yeah. Or you anticipate they will. See how this feels to you.
Okay.
If this isn't it, we'll go in another direction. But instead of going, look, I need time, I need to sit with this, and then they're like, oh, it's I, all about you. If you lead with, thank you for being patient with me. I'm going to need a little time to sit with this, but I'm not putting you off. So if you can give them the reassurance, and really we don't mean this in a manipulative way, but it's a programming. Like, you could say, well, I hope you don't get upset while I'm processing what word just came out.
Yeah, upset.
Right? But if you say, would you be patient for just a moment? Or thank you for being patient, or thank you for giving me some time.
Yeah.
So you're leading with the assumption or the request, sort of, with gratitude, because I really want to be able to share with you, but right now I'm not quite able to put it into language yet.
Yeah.
You're asking them to not only be patient, but be gracious with me, right? And there's an education in that to say, well, oh, no, take all the time you need. Most people, when it's addressed that way, will realize, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just trying to understand, like, what's the problem here, right?
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, we could switch gears from that, too. I just wanted to kind of bring that in, since we touched on it with anger. The next topic I had, unless you have something else on that.
We're always glad to follow your lead, dear.
Good stuff. was the unity of all religions, another big topic. There's this parable I'll start with, the parable of the blind priest and the elephant. Have you heard this? Where each has a piece of the elephant, like one is holding one of the legs and one's holding the trunk and one's holding the tail. And they're all describing different things. Like the one that has the tail says it feels like a broom, and the one that's got the leg, it's thick like a tree, and the one that's got the trunk, it's swinging like a rope, whatever.
Right.
You could imagine. And that's the analogy is like when we try to describe religion, that each of the religions maybe has a piece of this one elephant, but we're blind, so we can step back and go, oh, it's all the same elephant. So I love that story because it kind of highlights.
There's truth in that.
Yes.
Each one has, each blind priest will be like, no, I'm right.
Yes.
This is what it feels like. But because they don't have the more holistic, higher vantage point of understanding, they can't realize, well, you're right also.
Yeah.
And your right doesn't make my right wrong.
Exactly. That's why that parable is so good.
It's great.
So let me start with that proposition. Is it true that all religions, that there's unity to the major world religions, or we could even say all religions?
Thank you for being patient while we take into consideration that question.
Absolutely.
So actually, we're going to reiterate it. Like, are you asking, do all religions promote unity, or is there a commonality among all religions?
Is there a commonality among all religions? Because they don't all promote unity, unfortunately.
Let's say various religions in their purest state no doubt have at their core a belief in, whether it's a god or a deity, a higher power, a higher energy, a connecting energy of love. So we would say most, if not all religions in their purest state will have the commonality of connectedness with the divine.
Unity even,
And unity, yes. The reason we qualify that by saying in its purest state, nothing will be in its purest state if it's being experienced through human form, because humans are not perfect. So where religion can kind of go off the rails is if someone really loses the focus or the heart of what they're teaching and sharing and move toward, let's say, greed or power or things that will distort the understanding of the religion.
Yeah, because at their heart, and it seems like even all the major sages or enlightened people like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, the ones that sort of created the religions, had a certain unity. I mean, many people have looked at the certain, the unity of the various religions, but then it seems like maybe the followers sometimes lose sight of that wholeness.
Yes.
But
yes.
I guess, and then what we do is, as humans, as we try to say, well, one religion is better than this one, and we kind of start to judge. I've even heard, like specifically about Islam is often accepted out as like an inherently violent religion. A lot of people feel that way, and I know personally it's not true. Because I've looked at it, but I guess, is it really true that let's just ask that, is Islam, are there certain religions like Islam that should be accepted out of this idea that at their core all religions
and we're going to say at its purest core, right?
Yeah.
We can't imagine that any human religion promotes hatred or violence or superiority, right? Our sense is the very purpose of a religion or spiritual teaching would be to connect the individual with the indwelling spirit and to create a sense of unity with others and their indwelling spirit, and with the divine, however it is perceived, also a connection at a spiritual level with the divine, right?
Yeah.
So it can all probably be distilled down to a very simple practice, but how do they do that? Do they do it because they feel they need to meditate in the morning? Do they do it because they feel they need to pray on their knees at night, right? So how individuals have interpreted putting that into practical action might be different. And then, of course, there's violence that under the guise of religious beliefs.
Yeah.
But our sense is the truth, the core of religion really should be, and probably for most major religions, bringing the person back to their own connection with the divine, and then respect for one another, as opposed to, if you don't do it my way,
Yes.
then I hate you, or I think you need to be killed, or whatever.
And all the major religions have spiritual sects. And in other words, that there's, there's like the religion, but then there's also the spirituality of the religion. Like, for example, I mentioned Islam. The Muslim mystics, the Sufis, they're a spiritual sect, and the spiritual sects of the religions are the ones that seek that sort of union with the divine. There's definitely spiritual Christian sects, and with Hinduism, we see it with yogic teachings, and Judaism, there's the Kabbalist teachings. Like, all of the major religions have the sort of sections or sects that are more inclined toward those spiritual teachings, which some could argue is more of the heart of what the religion is.
We would probably be aligned with those people. Yeah.
Because, and we could mince words, or we could really get, look at like a religion like Islam more closely and go, well, in the Quran, there's some stuff about violence, but that is also found in the Bible. There's, in the Old Testament, there's violence.
Right.
And, it's hard to kind of pick and piece things out. So what I'm kind of proposing, and what I'd like to ask you is shouldn't the leaders of all the religions sort of have a duty to condemn violence, and even violence that could maybe be justified by the religious texts themselves?
Yes. And we're just going to touch on the sects. To us, the idea of the religious sects being the heart of, we would say that's probably, again, there's going to be some human influence, but that probably is closer to the purity of what that religion teaches, right? Closer to the purity.
Yeah.
And what happens is we think generation upon generation, there's distortions coming into play that says, well, I mean, we don't really believe this, but in this instance you can. When individuals will go back and study what's happening at the time, maybe laws are put into place that now we're like, why would they have that law?
Yeah.
Right? So the evolution. But our sense is, if someone, a spiritual leader, for example, feels like it's okay in this circumstance to do a cruel thing or do a hateful thing, their belief has been skewed, and it might be so ingrained in them because they're the sins of the fathers, right? It goes back and back. But each generation, each individual owes it to themselves to say, am I really in alignment with what is currently being taught? They might like the umbrella or the community of this. I like hanging out with Christians, or I like going and spending time with my Sufi friends, or this. But ultimately, are the teachings still in alignment with the highest truth of that day versus, well, we've just always done it this way, or this is what I was taught? There still needs to be discernment. There still needs to be a deeper understanding and a willingness, a curiosity of, is this really the purity of the teachings as it was set out, or with some of these guidelines just simply because of the times?
Yes.
And now we don't have to talk about that. Now we're here. So again, even religions need their own evolution. And when individuals are stuck in the doctrine, the dogma, they are failing to grow along with literally the times, then the changing times.
That makes so much sense. So we do then agree that the religious leaders have a duty to condemn violence and to evolve as the times would dictate. Yes?
Yes. Yeah. And we would say, if they're willing to sit with the heart of their beliefs and willing to explore, expand, and evolve, then it will only make sense that violence doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
Right? If they do it in that order.
You reminded me of another story, another parable when you were talking about that. And let me see if I get it right. But I think it's something Eckhart Tolle would sometimes talk about, where, let's say there's this religion and people met to worship, and they were, praying together, and there was a cat that was kind of annoying. So they would put it, tie it up to like a pole, and they would continue to,
go
about their worship or whatever. And they were only doing that because the cat was
right. That particular cat in that instance.
Yes. And
right.
Then years go by, that cat dies, and now the new followers are like, we need to tie a cat to the pole
in order to
do our worship.
Right. These things can easily become doctrine, and they were just to address a singular issue. It's a perfect example. Perfect. Oh, well, this is the way the fathers and the fathers of the fathers did it. But what was the reason then?
Yes, exactly.
Candles versus electricity. Like, we always have to have candles. Well, maybe they didn't have alternatives then, right?
Yeah.
So taking into consideration literally what's transpiring in the world, but the authenticity of spirit really dwells within the moment. So anything based on, well, this is what the teachings are written, these are the translations, this is the dogma, this is how we've always, chances are there's going to be some downside to that just in and of itself. Teachings can be passed on, but with the understanding we need to see this through the eyes of the present moment.
Yeah.
Where truth really can only dwell in the present moment.
Makes sense. So let's see if we have more on that. Just going back to, I guess a lot of times the differences in religions are what people use to justify hatred toward people of other religious faiths. That religion is different.
And chances are they don't have a deep understanding. It's just something they've heard, or they, saw some clip on the news, like, see, there they are again, right? As opposed to like, what has happened to cause that person to act like that? So again, the willingness to have a deeper, more comprehensive understanding, more times than not, will take away that tendency to go, I don't like those kind of people, that kind of thinking.
Because, again, we're pigeonholing.
Yeah.
For example, Christians maybe all get pigeonholed as evangelicals or fundamentalists, Jewish people as Zionists, and, Muslims as violent or whatever you're going to do. But is it fair to speak in these generalities?
It would never be.
Yeah.
Because even if a statement was true, all Christians are fundamental. If someone spends time in the home of this version of Christianity and in the home of that version of Christianity, they're going to just in that context see differences.
Yeah.
Right? So then you take that back generationally, you go forward, you go, this version of it, the more heart of a religion, how do those people act? So curiosity and a willingness to consider other possibilities. Anytime someone is like, well, I just don't like them because, the saying, point one finger out and three are coming back, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so say, well, I don't really like what I'm seeing here, but it would behoove me to become better informed so I have a deeper understanding of why would someone act like that? Or is there something I feel inclined to do to not just have a greater sense of knowledge, but also to extend from my perception something to help them to ease their pain, to ease their suffering, to reduce their chance of whatever actions they're doing.
Yeah. Which kind of ties into what we were saying about anger too. I feel like just or leaving space for possibilities.
Right. Right. It definitely does. Because if each generation continues to pass on the prejudices of the past, it's a destructive direction to go in.
And at the end of the day, can't all religions be gateways to divine union?
Yes. That's a simple answer.
I guess it's kind of a simple question. Or I add in parentheses, or separation. All religions can be gateways to separation from the divine as well.
We'll only hope that they use their power and influence wisely.
And if divine union is the goal, I mean, not all religions or all practitioners may see it that way, but it does seem like at the heart of at least the religions that we talked about, that union with the divine is the goal.
Right.
Okay, well, let's switch topics a little bit. Now I've got the next topic. Maybe we can do one more before we wrap up today.
Perfect.
My heading is God's tests. Because some folks see life as constantly testing or tempting,
right.
and quotes them. There's a, Judeo-Christian root to this belief system probably that we see, and it's definitely in our culture. But let me just ask you, are we being, quote, tested?
As humans walking around the planet?
Yeah.
We would say no, dear. it's that projection of someone watching you, and it like a parent going, well, are you going to cross the road or not? We could go into other examples, but our sense is that's probably a projection of someone's experience of maybe judgmental teacher, a judgmental parent. It's like, well, see, that was a stupid decision you made. We don't even like speaking like that. So the idea like, well, God's watching you, you're being tested, you're probably going to fail. It takes all the joy out of life itself, and it takes the sense of curiosity and adventure. It really dampens it, because somebody goes, well, I don't want to make the wrong choice. How often do you witness people that are almost paralyzed for fear of being judged, making the wrong choice that will absolutely, be considered a sin, these kind of things. So the idea of being judged and tested, there are opportunities to grow and learn from one's mistakes, from one's actions. So there's a lot to it. But the thought of some external form or being, setting up these difficulties so the person can sink or swim, pass or fail. It's well, we don't mean to harm anyone or create disharmony in someone's thoughts or beliefs, but to us it feels ridiculous.
Yeah, I actually had here that maybe the word opportunity. I think that might have been something we've talked about before, because I said I had your name. I think you've told me that before. Maybe calling it an opportunity or a challenge instead of a test.
Right. Test implies it's going to be hard. You're not going to like it, and you pass or fail.
Yeah.
Just say, wow, this is different. Again, we love these sort of neutral statements that open up a lot, right? So it's like, wow, I've never done this before, as opposed to like, wow, look at this test now. Now I'm being tested by this.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's just something you've never encountered. And often when people go to that place of agitation or resentment, they're tired. They'd like a hand up. They'd like some assistance, and they're afraid. It's like, oh God, here I go again. Now I have this problem. It's like, oh, when will God stop testing me?
Yeah.
Instead of just going, wow, I'm kind of going through a tough time right now. I'm be glad when I'm on the other side of this wave, So is it a projection of some old beliefs? Is it serving the individual to believe they're being tested? Right? When someone really does explore that deeper, it sets up a rather cruel system.
Yes.
Right? And our belief is the divine is benevolent, and the divine will, if humans are made in God's image, right? Then is God this judgy, like, well, look at you making a fool of yourself again?
Yeah.
Or as if we perceive that the divine, the spark of divine within, and that which is divine is benevolent, let's say, then there would be no test. And somebody says, well, why do I go through these hardships? Because the soul grows through these, the soul can come away with so many wondrous experiences and learnings and lessons through these hardships. How many people say, and we may have used this example before, and apologies if we're repeating, but people will say, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me, whatever it is. Maybe there was a death in the family, or they had cancer, or, they lost a loved one. It was the worst thing. But because of that, now, we know an individual, lovely, wise woman, that one of her children died. And it just gutted her and changed the direction of her work.
Yeah.
And instead of staying in the line of work, which she was good at, she now is an advocate for families that have lost children. She now helps others, So yes, it was one of the worst things, if not the worst thing, but because of that, she is now in a position to help others, right? So was she being tested by that? It wasn't a test.
Yeah.
It might have felt like the most heavy thing she ever had to endure, but it's an experience that was horrible for her. But in all of that negativity, out of the wreckage came a mission, a purpose.
Beautiful. And there's lots of stories like that
Yes.
about people. And in my own life, I tend to think, even when horrible things happen, I wouldn't change it necessarily because it would make me different. I wouldn't be who I am, and I like who I am and the growth
because of having been through
yes,
it, right?
Yeah.
And some would say, well, there you go, you passed the test. But if someone doesn't learn and they have to repeat it, is it because they're dumb? Sometimes it just takes a little longer to go, okay, this is striking a familiarity. Maybe there's a takeaway here. So there's learnings and teachings and lessons. But to take that to the extreme to say, well, see, you're being tested.
Yeah.
To us, that we can't abide by that.
And to kind of pick up on something you mentioned earlier, I feel like that mentality is unhealthy and can lead to self-punishment, shame,
Absolutely.
guilt.
There's a no-win situation. Because if someone does well, they're like, yay, good, I passed the test. But then it's inevitable, well, I passed this test, but the next one I might fail. So they don't even get to enjoy the glory of just feeling good about feeling good, right? Because the next thing is like, yeah, but tomorrow I'm probably going to make the same mistake again. So it just sets up this pattern of kind of cruelty, and it's very unhealthy. Shame and guilt and repression of the spirit, like, oh well, I know I always screw up. No, to say, I'm learning this lesson and I'll be glad when it's fully integrated. And in the meantime, I'm going to do my best to be patient, instead of thinking someone else is judging. Like, I want to integrate this, it's showing up again. So let me see what the takeaways are, for me as a soul being, right?
Yeah.
Taking responsibility for all that it is instead of, again, projecting it out. Like, why is God being so cruel to me?
Well, what's wrong with me? Because I feel like we have a tendency to kind of rub our nose in our mistakes. Or I've done that myself.
Yeah.
I've known people that do that, where we'll sort of replay mistakes in our minds to kind of teach ourselves not to do it again, and kind of self-manipulate through guilt and shame.
Yeah.
Like as a way of going, look what you did.
Yeah.
Remember what you did, so the next time you don't
do it again.
Yeah.
No.
That doesn't seem healthy.
Anytime there can be more grace, more allowance, because we will often say, if the human experience is about growing and learning, and if no human is fully self-realized, no human, then mistakes are inevitable. And to think there need be cruelty around something that's the inevitable, it makes no sense. It's a setup, like we said.
Yeah.
So to say, well, look at that. Look at me just having another human experience. What can I learn from that? When there's a little wit, a little joy, a little compassion and grace and humor, it's a lot easier to integrate those lessons and say, oh, there I go. I screw it. I always make that same mistake. We're always advising against making statements like, there I go again, or I always do that. Just say, no, boy, I'll be glad when this is integrated and I can get on to the next opportunity of learning.
Yes.
Right? Bring a little whimsy into it
next?
And watch how much easier it is and more lightness there is around that instead of the heaviness, the guilt, the shame.
And that actually kind of plays right into like under the same topic. But the next little point I had was, there's this yogic concept of Leela, that God's play, right? That what we're here for isn't a test, it's to play. That they call it Leela, but it means like God's play or a game, that we're partly here for that. And that there's joy and humor in life. And that God, the divine, the universe has a clear sense of humor. So,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. You look at the purity of children.
Yes.
Right? They're out just playing and they may fall and have a bad experience because let's say they're running and they trip over a root from a tree.
Yeah.
And they get hurt and they're sad and they cry and they're upset, but they're not blaming outside themselves like, well, who put the root there so that I have to learn that lesson?
Yeah.
No,
who's
but
testing me?
Who's testing me? The child just goes, oh, I didn't see it. Boo-hoo. Mommy wipes it off or doesn't, and they get up and start playing again. And usually they've moved right through it and right past it. Often just observing children and their very nature is to be curious and to play. And it's the influence of society and jaded individuals that start to close in, pigeonhole their beliefs, right?
Yeah.
But if anyone needs the reassurance and the remembrance of what purity looks closely like, watch a child on a playground.
Yeah.
Like, watch a child with a doggie or in a field somewhere with flowers. Watch what they instinctively want to do. They don't want to just sit there and think about their problems. And, I wonder if God's listening to me. They're just
just joy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Experiencing the playful aspects of life.
A soul having a human experience.
Right. And finding the joy and the wit and the humor and the love and the connection versus dwelling on the opposite.
Yeah, because dwelling on the opposite and the belief in tests, I feel like can sometimes lead to a paranoia, of reality.
And then the spirit is closing off because now I'm afraid. What are they going to think? What is God going to think?
You're not open.
I'm not perfect. Nobody understands. And the spirit just starts to feel very contracted, very confined, which is the opposite. If you're here to play and learn and grow and love and connect and experience, then the openness is what's going to bring that about much more readily than anything that causes constriction.
Makes sense. Well, there's this word pronoia. Have you heard of this? It's the opposite of paranoia.
Pronoia.
Which I kind of like. Maybe duality isn't the best to have one or the other, but it's living with the belief that everything is conspiring in your favor versus
beautiful.
Thing is conspiring against you. So I tend to, want to stay more in that sort of world.
Beautiful.
It's a fun way of playing with reality.
Absolutely. Good can come out of every circumstance.
Yes.
Now, again, just not to bring it back to a heavy note, but this individual that lost a child, right?
Yeah.
Some people would say to her, well, you have other children. Like, why? You've got to, as though, right? And she's had to stand and feel all the things people have said that have been deeply harmful to her, right? Deeply hurtful. And yet in having those experiences now, she's so keenly aware of speaking from a place of deep connection and not minimizing like, oh, well, you'll be better in time. And
you don't want to
platitudes.
Say those things, yeah.
No. So she
don't know what to say.
She teaches others now how to know how to respond. So good can come out of all circumstances, right? And it may not be apparent right away. It may not be apparent for years. But with the understanding, like, instead of thinking, why me, poor me, why is this bad happening? Say, this is a bad thing, and I'm really hurting to the core. But my hope and prayer is, and I'm willing to see this, that where is the good? Where is the silver lining? And I'm sure there will be one.
Yeah. That belief, the pronoia, that everything is conspiring in your favor. It can be a fun way to take you out of like a little practice anyway, to take you out of when you notice yourself maybe having those conspiratorial thoughts or like the testing type thoughts.
Yes.
Well, maybe leaving the space for the possibility that the opposite could be true.
Possibly come out of this, even if someone says it a bit sarcastically, like, what good could possibly come out? But just if you actually say, what good could come out of this, right? Say, and just staying open, right?
And then I have this E.B. White quote. It's maybe a little off point, but it kind of fits in here too, that there's this dance between changing the world and enjoying it. Like we want to change things, but like the children that you mentioned, there's something just so wholesome about just being in nature and being
100%
enjoying this creation.
There's such beauty and majesty here. Someone, people, if they go to the beach, this is the state of Florida. People go to the beach, they're usually not in a real heavy state of being. They're like, oh, felt so restorative. I was so relaxed. I was just so
true.
Right. So finding ample amounts of time to explore and experience and really relish the human experience. And when the hard comes, that person's going to have more of a solid base to deal with the hardships because they've spent ample amount of time playing.
Yes.
If someone is just, I'm serious, we got to fix, we got to change, we got to, chances are their spirit becomes very worn and beaten down for spending an inordinate amount of time hyper-focused on the negative aspects and the transformation rather than saying, we're going to get to these, we're definitely addressing these things, but we're also going to make sure there's ample time for just childlike whimsy and play.
And that kind of leads into the next point I wanted to propose, which is that maybe on the most gross physical level of reality that we tend to get caught up in, we got to change this and change the world, or, politics, whatever, that maybe that's not the most effective way to change things on the grossest physical level, if you stay with me a minute. But maybe there's an energetic level that's more malleable and easier to change. So like, for example, we get caught up in the drama of world collapse and politics, but, you could get really caught up in like what needs to change specifically versus seeing those systems will not be able to exist in this higher version of reality. And that maybe that leads us to continue to elevate ourselves and those around us while understanding that those lower frequencies can't exist, and that some of that less may take care of itself, in other words, versus getting so caught up in it.
We'll advise individuals to crowd out the negative thoughts, not deny them, not suppress them, crowd them out with the positive, right? And so, there's the expansion toward, like you said, the energetic patterning of the higher vibration, and then the less there's just not space for it anymore. So it has to cease to be. So attacking against something sometimes can actually ignite that and energetically
make
create
it dig
more.
In almost.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't like that, and it's not denying, but saying by replacing that with, right, then it has less space to occupy and eventually can just dissipate.
So would you agree that it's that sometimes affecting change on the grossest, most physical level of reality isn't as effective as doing it on a higher level, on
quite
a more
often
energetic level?
It won't be the most effective. That's right.
Because it's almost like trying to solve the problem on the level of the problem, or typically you need to kind of elevate above the problem to see it.
And
most
there might be
effectively.
real world action required, but ultimately seeking the most expansive solution and then putting it into play, as opposed to we're just going to dig in here, right? No, what is that greater perception, that more observer position? And from that vantage point, how can we just expand this, address this, rather than just, like you said, on the most, we would take the word gross and maybe as dense level.
Dense, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dense. That analogy, I was kind of thinking, what's an analogy? And one popped in my head. I'm sure you've heard it. It's that where there's, babies coming down a river and someone's at the bottom of the river taking them out. And, I need help getting all these babies out of the river. And then someone else is leaving. They're like, where are you going? I need help. And they're like, well, I'm going to go see why the babies are being thrown out.
Right. Go back to the root as opposed to just handling the problem as it is.
Maybe that's the analogy, is that, the most dense layer sometimes is just, cleaning up mistakes versus going to the heart on an
figuring out why there are mistakes, right? That's a good analogy. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And again, it kind of circles back to this staying open to possibilities. There's something like, why? Just, I need help right now. We got to save the baby. We never heard of that one. Save the babies. And someone else, why are you leaving? You're abandoned.
Yes.
Me. Yeah. Right? Why can't you just dig in here and help? And this person's got the greater vision going, I'm going to go solve the problem. As opposed to just stay here. Yeah. Yeah. And again, even your elephant analogy, it's like this person is action oriented. We got to get here, and they can stay. You keep helping the babies. This person is perhaps more holistic in their approach, more the visionary that says, it's on my heart to go figure out what's happening, but that's fine. You keep.
And we need both. Maybe we need someone to be, making sure the babies that are there aren't drowning.
That's it. And because if everybody leaves, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's why getting into that quiet space, and we're not saying that's so no music, no sound, but a place of stillness that says, where am I being authentically called? And this person feels to stay, and maybe someone else, I'll stay, and then two other people, we're going to go, it's on our heart to go do that.
Yeah.
And when people follow literally their authentic calling, then great things can come about.
Love it. Well, let's end there today. We're about out of time, but we'll go ahead and, what do you have upcoming? Do we have anything to plug? We're going to bring Mary back. Thank you, Shanna.
It's our joy and honor always, dear one. Thank you. Just finding that people are entering into the energy of summer now.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I can feel collectively, especially where we live, this general area, people are kind of like, it's the end of the year. It's the end of the school year. I just feels like there's a collective sigh, no more testing.
Yes, there we go.
Quite literally for the students. So nothing in particular other than everyone and get to the beach and have some fun.
Don't you have any events coming up? I thought you had
Evening with the Channel.
Yes.
We'll have Evening with the Channel in the middle of summer. Don't have the date exact, but it's on the website,
maryhayes.org. And
Yes.
and we should invite people to also follow the podcast. If you're
Yes.
listening on Spotify, go ahead and follow because that helps,
Yeah.
and give a rating. That's super helpful. And on YouTube, you can subscribe to our channels and
Yes.
hit that like
Hit
button.
the like button.
Leave in comments, all that type of interaction.
We're very
helps.
glad to take comments and have feedback of topics and just, what you're enjoying in particular. Yeah.
Absolutely. But make sure to follow on Spotify and rate the podcast. And I'm at theyogalawyer.com, sacredforest.farm on all socials. And Mary is Mary Hayes Intuit Medium and maryhayes.org. So thank you for having you. Third episode of our podcast.
Yay. Thanks, Kelly.